Now I will attempt a dissection of my own by looking at 3 examples or poems that, from my point of view, focus on some of the emergent, conflictive, and ambivalent Peruvian subjectivities of the 17th century. First, I will take a look at what could be thought of as one of the earliest literary manifestations of misogynist discourse in Peru. And we all know what misogyny is. It's, as I mentioned, Valle Caviedes' favorite satirical target was the medical profession, but also with no less insistence, his satire was also directed at women. It is interesting to notice, however, that if much has been written on his attack of doctors, almost nothing of substance has been said about his vituperation of women. I am not sure why this is the case, but I would like to offer some conjectures on his misogynist writings. Autobiographical readings, which, by the way, have been the norm, something which I elude altogether, have insinuated that the poet's attack on women respond to his unlucky, or perhaps his lucky, fortune with romantic involvements. What has been commonly said, however, is that his misogyny conforms to the imitation of a long-standing tradition of Western literature. This is undoubtedly true. Valle's satire, as most satire of the period, imitates a tradition. But I wonder if this explanation is solely appropriate. Should we accept it as sufficient and satisfactory? One should perhaps recall some much-quoted words by Howard Block, for whom to see misogyny only under the lens of tradition is a way of naturalizing or universalizing anti-feminist thought, and as such, although perhaps unknowingly, perpetuate Western misogyny. My intent here, although partially so, is to look at how the misogynist tradition that Valle Caviedes imitates is at the same time informed by a historical supplement that deals with its American context. In other words, to read his anti-feminist works not only an aesthetic and burlesque imitation of, say, European misogyny, but also as a cultural discourse. Perhaps one could think of historicizing or contextualizing in the New World Western misogynist traditions, and as such contribute to a recognition of its accidental and not essential nature. Throughout his works, Valle Caviedes reiterates the already mentioned association between satirical and medical practices. With a scalpel, he wishes to uncover and remove a variety of social and moral illnesses, such as courtly hypocrisy, envy, avarice, etc., but also diseases linked to erotic entanglements among the well-known ereos. I don't know if you know the term ereos. Ereos comes from Ovid. It's love sickness. We all must have suffered from ereos from time to time. Where you can't sleep, where you can't eat. Ereos or love sickness, a grave illness for which, since antiquity, a common cure was a most misogynist vituperation of women. How many times have you heard, think of her doing this, or think of her doing that, and you'll forget her? I mean, this goes back to Ovid in De Amore, on his book on De Amore. And his remedies for love, Ovid's remedies for love, give you all the possibilities of how to get rid of the memories of the woman who left you for someone else. So a common cure was precisely a most misogynist vituperation of women. Thinking of her negatively, saying things about her negatively, speaking of her negatively, and so forth. What I would like to do, however, is to expand a bit the historical horizon of this traditional cure for ereos, in order to incorporate into the discussion a new illness linked to women, which could not have been part of the, say, Ovidian or Archpriest of Talavera's misogynist curative prescriptions. I'm referring to syphilis, or the pox, the mal de bubas, as it was called at the time, a disease which first is mentioned in Europe in 1494. Already in 1495, Francisco López de Villalobos, in his Sumario de la Medicina sobre un tratado sobre las pestíferas bubas, or Summary of Medicine with a treatise on the pestiferous pox, identifies a plague-like component to the negative effects of love sickness. Among his warnings, he states, Eros, according to our authors, responds to a corrupt imagination and makes men complain of pains of love, and advises that the patient's friends, quote, remove him quickly from that lady as men run from tainted air in times of pestilence, end of quote. A direct link to syphilis is not mentioned here, but the erotic is seen in terms of a plague. It should also be noted that syphilis became a most favored disease of the 17th century poetic imagination, given the Baroque's preference for the grotesque and the decaying bodies. There are countless examples of the physical lesions of the so-called pox in ascetic and moralistic writers, as well as in satirists, among them the Peruvian Valle Caviedes. What I would like to suggest now is that, giving the express medical purpose of his satirical works, Valle's obsessive and simultaneously comical and monstrous descriptions of the possible effects of carnal love, although resounding of moral preaching, at the same time, in the face of the presence of syphilis, can be read as examples to intimidate would-be lovers. An important fact that corroborates the relationship I want to establish between Valle's description of the effects of syphilis in misogynist discourse is that in his complete works, this illness is only described for the case of women. The female body is, in a sense, the page upon which the physical dangers of sexual love are written. Let us turn there to one poem whose title is A una dama que por serlo paró en la caridad. To a dama, dame, lady, who, because she was so, ended up in charities. See, this is what's difficult to translate. The title is comically polysemious, or has several meanings. Dama, or lady, besides its official meaning, in slang also connoted prostitute or concubine. The lady ends up in charities, but charities, in an alternate reading, refers to the Hospital of Charities in Lima, where the lady ends up. The poem makes use of a number of well-trodden satirical conventions on promiscuity, with quite of an ingenious and original use of conceits, wordplays. In two of his many stanzas in which the effects of the pox are described, the poem focuses on the eyes and the mouth of the lady. The mouth being of great importance for the pleasures of sexual encounters, and one of Valle's favorite satirical female targets. In his works, women are vociferous, demanding, gluttons, gossips, etc. All vices or behaviors related to the mouth. In this poem, we read that the stricken lady, already in hospital, and this is your quote one, I'll read it in Spanish and then read my paraphrase. De su estrella se lamenta porque en luceros peligras y cuanto causó la Venus con el mercurio no quitan. My paraphrase is, she laments her unlucky star because her bright stars are in danger, if all which had caused by Venus, Mercury does not take back. Not easy to understand. The semantic playfulness of these verses conjoins echoes of the much-used celestial metaphors for the description of women, with certain references to her sexuality. That the woman laments her unlucky star has several connotations that should be looked at. On the one hand, it is an obvious reference to her bad luck in terms of the well-known relationship between destiny and astrology. But her complaint also alludes to an accepted belief, well documented, for example, in the already mentioned Francisco López de Villalobos, that contagion of venereal disease, as most plagues, was also linked to astrology. And I have a footnote on this if you want to discuss it later. It's very, very interesting. On the other hand, the star of which she complains is also a direct reference to a syphilitic ulcer, a common metaphorical use that we find, for example, in La Lozana Andaluza of Francisco de Licao, a work written around the same time. Furthermore, the star, or ulcer brings to mind, in a parodic fashion, the infected eye of the woman. Stars or heavenly bodies were commonly used as metaphors to praise the beauty of a woman's eye, a woman's eyes. Your eyes are like stars.